Hi, welcome back to another episode of Supersonic Self-Love. I'm your host, Mary England, or Uncustomary, and this is the first episode that I am recording in 2020, and I am trying to go more with the flow. I've always had at least a very thorough outline or even almost a script, and I have a lot of topics that I want to go over this year. I want to try to do this as much as I can on a weekly basis. I have a lot of things that I want to get out there and I want to talk about and just throw out there. And I don't want to restrict myself to how I would word a blog post or anything like that. So I want this to be a little more freeform. I definitely still have notes that I want to make sure that I touch on. But especially for like larger topics like today, where we're going to be touching on something that's very, very big, kind of like when we talked about mental health. I mean, all of these topics are really big. And that's kind of the point is we're talking about something that is very large in an umbrella term, and we can break it down and think about how it applies to us. And what we're going to be talking about today is labels and how we can misuse them, how they can hurt people, how they can empower people, how you might want to use them for yourself or release them. And yeah, let's just get started. So before we do, I drew some affirmation cards like usual, and they are from the Practicing You Daily Awakening deck by Elena Brower. This is a really nice deck. It's very introspective. It's very good for journaling and meditating. They're very different kind of cards, and I like them a lot. The first one that I chose was, what will you emphasize? What will you set free? This is what I'm amplifying. This is what I release. And I think this is going to make a little more sense as I talk about labels and the idea of not necessarily needing to hold on to things that don't feel right to you. We'll get into that a little more. And then the second one that I chose is, who within you chooses? So there's a bunch of prompts here, and I'm going to read them to you. I choose to be the source. I choose to be adaptable. I choose to be safe. I choose to be sweet. I choose to be strong. I choose to be clear. I choose to be. So just kind of planting these seeds that you don't need to hold on to labels. You can release them. And maybe the things that we can identify with are feelings or states instead of labels. So let's dive into this. Labels pop up in all sorts of areas of life, literally all of them. And they can be helpful, like, is this Tupperware thing of leftovers expired? It says here that I cooked it on Wednesday and now it's been too late and I probably shouldn't eat it. That's helpful, right? And as humans, we really like to know what things are. Each of our brains works very differently, but most of us want to kind of put things in boxes, like, if that makes sense. That's how my mind works, I guess. So we know how we can refer back to them for our own purposes, just for memory. But what about when it comes to people? I was thinking about ways that labels affect people from a very, very early age, and I thought of two interesting examples in media. And the first one was John Mulaney. He's one of my favorite comedians. He has this bit where he's talking about how he was never really good at math, and in his elementary school there were different math groups, and probably if you had a similar kind of schooling, there maybe were different reading groups or math groups, and they had separated them into the people that were good at math or above average and the people that weren't or below or average. And the people, they named the above average, the smart kids, the Blue Angels, which was after like the aviators, which is a really high level of esteem. And then the other group they just named Group 2, which is like, I mean, if it was Group 1 and Group 2, that would be one thing. But when you have the Blue Angels and then Group 2, it indicates something different. And to further this point, I don't know if you're a fan of The Office. If you are, you're probably my people. But I don't know if you remember the episode where Jim has a person from his childhood come in to apply for a job, and he hides because he's super embarrassed of what happened the last time he saw him, which was he was put in an accelerated reading group, and this kid, when they were kids, who's now an adult, was put in a lower level reading group. And that gave Jim this feeling of superiority, and he said, "My mom says you're too dumb to hang out with." It starts so early. You might be familiar with a very, very famous psychological experiment called the Stanford Prison Experiment, which is, I'm not going to get fully into it. You can Google or Wikipedia it, but it's basically this famous experiment that happened where people were assigned by random choice with the flip of a coin to either be in this confined prison environment, to either be a guard or a prisoner in a mock prison setting. And it had to end after like 6 days because it got way out of hand, like really, really, really out of hand. People were like, the guards were like super superiority complex, authoritarian rules, like psychological torture. It was way out of hand. And it just goes to show, like, when we give these labels or superiority or like whatever we feel like this idea, it doesn't really matter who's who or what's real. We can just go to town on what we think we have. It's interesting. So when we place people into groups that have names or labels, whatever you want to call it, we do this human judgment thing, which is like making mass assumptions about that entire group that now has that name or label. And that's basically just stereotyping, whether you want to admit it or not. And it's really, really dangerous. Sometimes it goes even farther than that. And we make these mass generalizations about a group, and it spawns off into hatred for that group. And that hatred creates prejudice and discrimination and new names and labels like slurs that are intended to make that specific group or an individual from that specific group feel small and undesirable and unimportant at the very minimum, if not much worse. Labels can prevent us from even having our own personal growth. Like, how many times have you thought, or at least heard, that wealthy people are selfish and spoiled? Like, so many people will never be rich or have the wealth that they want because they have negative associations with what being rich means, what a wealthy person is, and that will forever block them from getting the wealth that they want and deserve. So, like, what about descriptive labels? Like, some labels are just about a thing, right? But what about, like, okay, let's use fat versus thin, for example. So I am super on board with taking back the word fat. I am fat, and I think that if I call myself fat, that you shouldn't be like, "Oh no, you're not fat." Like, don't say that about yourself, because basically what you're saying to me is that I'm unattractive, undesirable, I'm ugly. And I didn't say that. I was describing myself as a descriptor the same way that I would say that I'm 5'8" or 31. And if a thin person said that, you wouldn't make them be like, oh no, don't say that. When someone loses weight, people congratulate them. People say, oh, you look amazing. And there's a big privilege that comes with being thin. There's also a lot of stigma that comes with being very thin, which I don't want to ignore. But in society, our society at least, there's a lot of stigma that comes with being fat, that we are assumed that we are lazy, that we're not exercising, that we're not healthy, a lot of stuff. And when we call someone fat, it's usually as like, oh, they're fat. Like, don't tell them, they might not know. Or like, just this idea that like it's an insult when it is it different than saying you're tall? It's not. But because of the association that we've ascribed to it, it has a different meaning. What about the way that so many people, when they're like telling a story and they're like, oh my God, you won't believe what happened on the subway today. And they're describing strangers. They like won't describe a person's race. Like they won't, like for example, if I was telling a story as a white person, most likely a white person won't say a person's race in the descriptor unless that person's race was different than their own. Why do we do that? What about like what I mentioned in episode 10 of Supersonic Self-Love about person-first language, where we say things like schizophrenic instead of a person who has schizophrenia. That's really important, right? You would never say a cancer person. You would say Diane has cancer, or Diane is suffering from cancer, or Diane beat cancer. It's different. It's important. What about using labels that are meant to describe a certain thing, but like we veered off in society and started using them in a derogatory way? People started saying things like gay to describe things that they felt were dumb or lame, which is inherently saying that being gay is dumb or lame. And we have come a long way with calling this stuff out, taking it out of media and stuff, but some people still think that like taking it out of media and calling people out on it is too much and we're being too sensitive. I've noticed that people always think someone is being too sensitive until it comes to an issue they're sensitive about, an issue that's about them, an issue that has affected them. I have seen so many times in so many different ways. Like, I remember when I was in high school, I heard this person use the word gay in a derogatory way, like 20 times within the lunch hour. And then someone at the same lunch table used the word retarded in the same exact way, like in a derogatory way, to describe the same thing. Like that person was using the word gay in that way. And that person lost their shit. They were like, oh my God, fuck you. Like, that's so insensitive and rude. How could you say that? I have a brother who has an intellectual disability. Well, maybe someone at that table had a brother who was gay. Maybe someone at that table was bisexual. The whole point is that we should operate as if someone might be offended. You don't know who you're talking to. And more than that, these terms are offensive when they're not being used correctly. I loved that in an episode of It's Always Sunny, they brought to light that the F word, not fuck, is actually meaning a bundle of sticks, and was adapted to refer to queer people in a derogatory way because they used to burn queer people at the stake if they thought they were any type of version of gay. So by using the F word, you are actually insinuating that someone should be burned at the stake for their sexuality. Okay, so at this point, I might have educated you on something you didn't know, or maybe you're just following along for the ride at this point. I don't know. Besides calling these things out, the reason that I wanted to do this episode is because I want to give you an option and a perspective. It is not one you might like. It is not one you might choose to take now or ever. It's something that you might adapt and use in certain areas or not. I simply want to give you an option for a new way of thinking, and you can run with it or you can drop it. Before I do that, let me back up for just a second. I'm gonna take a drink of water first. Some labels can actually give us a feeling of relief. When I first read the words OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, at the back of a teen magazine, like I talked about in episode 10, and realized that what I was experiencing had a name and other people were going through it too, I felt like there was this puzzle in my head that had been solved for me. And this is the case for so many people who struggle with mental illness, transgender dysphoria, sexual identity, like so many different things. It can be the best feeling in the world to, like, for you to be called a mom for the first time. It can be empowering as fuck to get a business card that says CEO on it when that's the thing you've been working towards for 20 years. Some labels are really empowering. Some give us answers. Some give us hope. Some remind us of love. And labels are just like words and time and money. They only take on the value that we assign to them. Recently, though, I realized that for more than half my life, I have been identifying as someone who has OCD, someone who has Tourette's, someone with mental illnesses. I've been identifying as fat. I've identified as a burner, a manic pixie dream girl, a blogger, an author, a body positive activist, a witch, a girlfriend, a slut, a daughter, an American. Like, these are descriptors of me. These things describe me, but they are not me. I am Mary. I am uncustomary. I am not just those things. For a long time, it was really important to me to like have these symbols, like for example, like a pentagram that let people know that I was into moons and paganism, and like that's no longer the case. I don't need a pin or a patch or an image on my vision board to let you or anyone else know what I do in my off time or like what I believe. It's like, you know how some people will get on a podcast and be like, okay, I'm really into cussing and I'm a huge cusser and there's like totally gonna be cussing in this podcast and I hope you're cool with that because I'm like really into cussing. Or like, yeah, I get that it's important for people to know because like they're at work and they don't want to get in trouble if cussing comes on the speaker, but like that's what NSFW, not safe for work, and captions are for. It's like when people make their entire identities and personality about pot and being like 420 friendly and loving pot and being like, just so you know guys, I'm like super cool with pot, and like busting in the door and being like, hey guys, I'm the cool aunt. Like, you're placing labels on yourself with the hope and the intent that someone or people or everyone will feel a certain way about you, I guess. Like, I guess that's the idea. Personally, what I prefer is for your personality to present itself to me organically. If you cuss, say fuck. If you smoke pot, smoke pot. If you want to be fucking cool, do whatever that means to you. Like, it'll come out when you're talking to me, you know? Like, there's a difference between notifying someone and respecting their personal boundaries and space and needing to announce your personality and labels. Just be yourself. So I'm Mary, and the fact that I am super sex positive and into self-love and witchy things and whatever will probably come out naturally in conversation if we talk. But like, I'm very much over the need to wear a name tag that like lists who I am and what I'm into and why. And if you like me, you can stay. If you have questions, you can ask. And if you don't like me, you can leave or unfollow me. But I will be as open as I can be about who I am. And that's just how I'm going to try to move forward. I know that so much, like, I know that sharing my story of different mental illnesses self-harm, eating disorders, my family life, and so many different other things has been like very helpful for other people to identify with, to know they're not alone. And I don't plan on not talking about that, and like I'm not like erasing that. I'm just reframing how I want to talk about it. I actually have like a blog post planned coming up for like my own personal story on OCD because I realized I just never made one for people to refer to. But then I can like make that in depth and people can reference it, and after that I'll just be good, you know? Like I can just be like, hey, here's the link. I'm not saying that I don't have OCD, and I am just, I don't know, it's a huge part of me. It's a huge part of my life, and understanding how my brain and my body works. But like I said in episode 10, I am not my mental illness. I am not my OCD, and neither are you. And leading conversations off like being like, hey, I'm Mary, I struggled with mental illness for 20 years is misleading because it makes you think that that's what I'm about. And I am so much more than that. And so are you. So the thing I want to challenge you to do this week is to look at all the ways that you might label yourself or people might label you. I have a worksheet that you can download so that you can be prompted to do this. Which labels feel important to you? Which ones feel like really good and empowering and exciting? And which ones give you purpose and motivations and like butterflies in your stomach and you're like, yes, that one. But like, are there ones that make you feel really angry or bitter or resentful or bring up feelings that you don't want to have anymore and you want to let go? Guess what? You are allowed to release any and all of them. You don't have to label yourself as anything. You don't have to tell people what you are. You don't have to wear a symbol around your neck. You don't have to spill the beans on Facebook. You don't have to introduce yourself as anything. And on the other hand, if a label feels exciting and like home to you, then fucking get it tattooed on your arm or write it on your forehead or get a poster or scream it from the rooftops. Like, you might go back and forth with how you feel about certain labels, and these ideas might evolve and change, and that's awesome. But you are always you, and you're more than these labels, and that's what I'm trying to share. Empowerment is different things to different people, and I just want to empower you to have the option to release any labels or stigma that do not feel good to you if you feel called to do so. And if not, that's great, and thank you for listening. This has been another episode of Supersonic Self-Love, talking about labels. Download the worksheet below, and for other resources on self-love and personal development, be sure to check out the Uncustomary Babes membership group. You can join for a yearly subscription now at a discount for the entire year, and I would love to have you send your membership card and talk more in depth about these kinds of things. I hope that you are having a great day. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.